We are broadcasting.
Fantastic. We like this. So how are you, Tom? How's things?
All right, mate. Thank you. What about yourself?
Well, I am fine, just fine. I just, it's not long since our last podcast, so I was wondering if there is a particular reason that you wanted to do one today. Anything grabbed your attention?
Well, we spoke briefly about the possibility of discussing demonetization. So, for people that don't know, YouTube has been removing people's ability, at least either in part or a significant amount of that. When they create YouTube videos, they're not, in a lot of instances, not able to make a living from creating their content. And I said to you that I wasn't certain that it was an interesting conversation for people who weren't YouTube creators.
Yeah.
And you said that you thought it was interesting because it's about social change.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
I think that's an interesting topic to start with.
Good one. All right. Yeah.
But before you do start,
word of the day.
Word of the day.
Love that.
Which is predication, which means the use of a base or reason to affirm something.
Ooh.
And the example is the judge ordered the release of the suspect because the officer could not supply adequate predication for his arrest.
Predication.
So honestly, I'm not entirely certain that I am able to put that into a sentence somewhere, but I might use it randomly instead of logical.
Predication. Yeah. Okay. Well, it's a challenge, Tom. I like that. I like a challenge.
A reason to affirm something. So I guess a reason why it's relevant.
Yeah. Predication.
But yeah, you were saying.
Well, I just think that a lot of people might be surprised actually about revenue from YouTube. If you're in YouTube and you make YouTube videos, and you hear a lot about other channels, YouTube channels where people do make a living out of it. To them, it's a major change, but to your average YouTube user, we're kind of only sort of, I guess, vaguely aware that there are YouTube celebrities or YouTube channels, for example, that make a lot of money, and everyone's heard of PewDiePie and a few others. Where people are making an absolute fortune. Vsauce is a good example. There are plenty where people are making staggering amounts, like Premier League footballer kind of salaries from YouTube channels. But the vast majority of people don't make anything much at all from YouTube channels. As you know, Tom, I've got a YouTube channel, and I don't mind saying I make approximately £250 to £300 a month from advertising revenue on it, and I haven't done any work on it for a few years, which is pretty good payoff, really, considering it's sort of completely passive income. But you certainly can't rely on it. It's not enough money to, it's not enough money to actually hang up my hat and say, well, I'm going to the beach on. But at the same time, I guess it's £3,000 a year, which comes in handy before tax. Of course, I get taxed on it. But anyway, I think it's probably a surprise, I'd say, to a lot of people that you can actually make money, or that most, that channels can make money off YouTube at all. Wouldn't you say?
Sorry, I was eating a yogurt.
Okay, so I mean that answers the fact that perhaps it isn't of interest to a lot of people, this particular topic.
No, I think what I was going to say, which I forgot in my initial question, was when you were talking about social change.
Yeah.
I thought it might be interesting to talk about. I mean, the YouTube thing is, I think, worth exploring, but also how the internet has changed with respect to where it perhaps was at one stage to where it is now.
Well, one predicates the other, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also what's happening right now and what will probably happen in the future.
Right. Okay.
So I think that's a good topic to talk about.
I agree. In terms of social change, because that was a good question, and I hadn't really answered it at all. So in terms of social change, the reason I think that there's social change in here and why it's important is because, in fact, it is possible to make money from YouTube, or has always been possible. The reason being that when YouTube arrived, they gave, well, certainly from the time when they became a subsidiary of Google, Google's basically Google is a huge ad machine. It makes its revenue, estimated last year, about 85% of its revenue, $44 billion from ad revenue. So that's from having ads showing. And I think it was about $4.4 billion worth of profit, or revenue anyway, for YouTube last year. So these are huge amounts of money, and where it's important is that it's actually allowed certain people to flourish, and it has created social change because previously, as you know, Tom, I used to work in the TV industry. I used to work many years ago for ITN News, where we made Channel 4 News, ITV News, Channel 5 News, and other sort of, also there were documentaries and things made there, where news related docs. So I came from that industry, and I kind of got into the industry the way most people do, through sort of knowing someone who knew someone, essentially. If you really want to know how I got into the industry, which probably most people don't, but I'll tell you very briefly. My mother had a friend who worked there, and I was at university in London, and she said, "Oh, Stuart's there. Go and say hello to Stuart, and he'll show you around the news building." And for ages, I didn't, because I didn't really need, I didn't really know him, and I thought, well, But eventually, one day, I didn't have anything to do, so I thought, well, why not? I'll go and say hello to Stuart, and he'll show me around the where they make the news, and it's so good use of the day, really, when you haven't got anything else to do. So I went down there and I tooled up and I said, "Hello, Stuart," and he said, "Oh, and I see you've grown a lot," and so on and so forth. And then he introduced me to his boss, and his boss said, "Come into this room with me." So I thought, it's a bit weird. So there I was in my sort of scruffy t-shirt and jeans and a backpack over my back, and I went into this room, and he said, "So tell me, why do you want to work in the news industry?" And I thought, what? And so I had an impromptu interview there and then. And I obviously did well enough to get through the interview, because I was offered a job. So that was kind of how I got into it.
Yeah, was that something that your mum knew about?
I don't think
this an interview that was planned, but you weren't aware?
No, I don't think it was. I mean, the guy who, it may have been, to be perfectly honest, there was a big change. At that time, ITN had combined with Reuters, and Reuters is a huge news channel which had a huge library. And it was about putting in the basement of the ITN building, there was a huge video library full of stock. And ITN make a lot of money selling or renting, if you like, or giving permission to use their old news stock. So you can have a look at, there's all sorts of really, really old school, I guess, bits of news flash and, reels of, it's an amazing place. Anyway, underneath the building, they got this amazing, huge, the whole basement is this huge library of video footage. And they combined it with Reuters, which is very well known in that industry, to create the world's largest library of news-related footage. And so it happened to be that I turned up at a time when they needed runners and people to help, organize it and set the library up. and the library was all it's all moving sort of bookshelves, if you like, and it was very, very well organized and things. Anyway, so they needed someone, and I turned up, and I don't know whether Stuart had mentioned it to him or not, but I mean, I'd been putting off going to see Stuart, and so there wasn't a lot of, you know, he didn't really know that I was going to turn up until that morning, I think. So I think it was just being in the right place at the right time entirely. But I absolutely did not expect to have a job interview, and I got a job, and it was a runner. It was basically the sort of the entrance level job that you get there. And that's how I started. And from there, I worked hard and I worked well. And eventually, after university, I went there full time, and I got a promotion to a news researcher, or trainee researcher, and then to a news researcher. And after that, I left after a few years, about 2 years or so. But it was a fantastic place to work. But the reason I mentioned it in the first place is because there was a huge list of people who had studied and gone and done media studies and things like this in university, and people from Oxford and Cambridge and all sorts. And there was an enormous list of these people, 20-odd thousand applicants for jobs that very rarely surfaced. And essentially, if you did media studies, I think was pretty much the most popular course at the time to do. You just put your name down on this list, and the chances of you actually landing a job in one of these sort of media companies was very, very slim. And occasionally, I mean, when they advertised jobs, they needed to include people from this list, but you can imagine it's incredibly competitive with thousands and thousands of people on the list. So you either got people who were really fantastically good, or you got people who knew people. And the vast majority of people, in my experience, were people who knew people, because who do you give a job to? Some unknown who happens to be really, really good, or your friend's son. That's kind of how it works.
How bankers get hired.
I think that's pretty much how almost everyone gets hired. I don't want to mention any names. I don't think we should go into things in any detail. But certainly in some of the large companies that I've worked, it's very much, they will post a job and they'll already have someone in mind that they want to fill that role. And maybe if you tool up there and you do a really good interview, because of course they're obliged to open the position up, and so you'll come in, and if you do a really good interview, they might put you down as a potential for the next job. So that might be a way. But if you really got on well with them and they really liked you and you impressed them, you might get the next job. But it's unlikely that you'd get the first job, because they're only advertising it because they're legally obliged to. They already have someone they want to fill the position. So this is kind of where I'm coming from. I don't know if you can tell. So essentially, with YouTube in particular, this was a massive revolution, because suddenly anyone could make a video and upload it, and there it was. You were a broadcaster. And YouTube was very interesting in that basically you have lots of any content really. You could put anything you want up there, but people actually chose certain types of video that appealed to them. And some of the videos that appealed were just staggeringly unusual, and still do. I mean, I think it's either common knowledge or perhaps it's not true. I don't know. But the most popular videos are cats and things like this. I don't know what you think about that. But I mean, things that you wouldn't expect to be, there's no production value. And a lot of the videos that do really well in YouTube and get lots of viewers and things like this have got little or no production value, but people want them for some reason. Do you know what I mean? So that was why I think it was sort of the beginning of a social change, making the media more popular. And I just think it's been an avalanche really. And it's what was the word of the day again? What was it again?
Predication.
It's predicated a huge shift, a paradigm shift in what is possible, and what, you know, how we watch TV, how we sort of see the world, and where we get our news sources from, and everything. So I think that this was largely due to the fact that a lot of people, and I'm not included in this, are very happy to spend a lot of their time just putting up content for no reward whatsoever. But a lot of savvy people realize that there's ad revenue to be made from it, and you could actually, if you had a popular channel, you could make a lot of money. And some people, as I say, made footballer kind of salaries. I made quite a modest amount, or still make quite a money. I'm saying this as if it's in the past, but I make a modest amount. So it's possible to you know, to get a bit of money from advertising. So maybe you just want to explain a little bit more about what the changes are, Tom, and then perhaps we can have a look at what impact that will have potentially on, you know, on everyone, on social change.
Well, to be YouTube specific, there was a bunch of brands that boycotted YouTube advertising. I can't remember if it was Google or YouTube. I think it was probably just YouTube,
Right.
Because they noticed that their ads were coming up alongside content which you wouldn't want to be associated with.
Right.
So, you know, it might even be like extreme content that even YouTube wouldn't want uploaded, and their ads were appearing next to it. You know, you could say like brand damage, that type of stuff. And so they all did the boycott, and in response to that, I think it was the YouTube CEO or spokesperson or whatever said that they were going to be a lot hotter on which videos were able to show ads, and also their algorithms were going to start picking up that type of content. And so what YouTube claims is that it's getting better at trying to sort out what's acceptable and what's not. But what the creators are claiming is that it's just not accurate. So there's plenty of stuff which is perfectly reasonable. Plenty of people would want to advertise alongside it. And the system is picking up stuff which is just not.
Well, hopefully an algorithm, which is, I guess this is based on, should learn over time and improve. But yeah, I mean, I know that you've had problems with your YouTube channel in terms of you know, things.
Well, that was more to do with copyright strikes than it was advertising. Although I suppose that they're interlinked, because someone claims that if someone makes a false claim, they are linked. But the one that I told you about today was about our digital marketing channel.
Yeah.
And it's that one. It was flagged as being
inappropriate for advertisers.
Yeah, and it wasn't even anything. You know, it's essentially about Google, which is very odd.
Inappropriate to Google, perhaps. Although it was in no way negative towards Google. It's just talking about a change, wasn't it? So, it's a bit of a weird thing. I mean, the problem as you know, as a creator and uploader of videos is that, you know, it's always been quite one-sided. I've never uploaded any content which has been copyrighted, and yet it seems harder and harder for me to defend myself against people who make fake, you know, false claims, and there's no repercussion to them for making a false claim, as far as I can tell. So it's not necessarily the most user-friendly, but on the other hand, you know, they've been paying this ad revenue. So if you have a popular channel, it's all about the number of clicks you have, really. If you get enough clicks, a proportion of those clicks will, enough views, it's about views. So if you get enough views, a proportion of those views will click an ad and you'll get paid. And so what are the change in the rules? Now you have to have at least 1,000 subscribers.
Oh yeah, that's probably another thing that they're doing in terms of quality is that smaller channels are not they're not allowed to have advertising. So you need 1,000 subscribers and a certain amount of viewing time in the last 30 days, I think it is.
Yeah.
And the one which was flagged up either today or yesterday was if your video is viewed as inappropriate or whatever, or advertiser unfriendly, you only get to appeal that if you've got 1,000 views in the last 7 days.
So this is a big change. This is a huge change, because everyone should have the right to appeal, regardless. But they're essentially saying that people who don't meet that criteria have no right to appeal anything. So I just don't. I think that's a big negative move, personally. And it comes back to this, what I was saying before about the fact that I got a job in the media because I knew someone and I was in the right place at the right time. Someone who had a lot more study. In fact, I didn't study media studies. Wouldn't have, they probably would have appreciated the job more than me, and they would have they probably wouldn't have done a better job. I'm sure they wouldn't, but they would have appreciated it more. But they wouldn't have got their foot in the door, so they wouldn't have got that job. And YouTube, by allowing everybody to upload videos, essentially it was a big social shift, in my opinion, and it gave anyone an equal ability to put their content out there. Because there are, as you say, there are sort of fascists and horrible people out there, extreme views. But I nearly caught myself saying, no offense to the fascists, but I'm sorry, I'm not that politically correct. So my point is, though, that they opened it up so that anyone can become a broadcaster. And I think in the US, you've got the ability to do, haven't they? They've got like some late night or some local channels. Here in Spain, I think they also do that. In the UK, you don't have that option. So it really gave everyone the opportunity to do that. And I guess they're not taking that away, are they, Tom? They're not saying you can't upload things.
Well, it's the ability to get any form of revenue from it.
Yeah. So they're eroding your revenue streams, essentially, or potentially eroding your rights to getting revenue.
Yeah. I think the predication for for YouTube being so popular as it was based on that fact. So I think that them making it less appealing is going to have an impact on them, because people are going to look at other ways, which is already happening, has already happened.
Yeah. So which other ways are available?
Well, we've been talking a little bit about this as well, was Patreon. So if you are a fan and if you are willing to, please do go to Patreon, and we only ask for like $2 or something to support the show. But yeah, there's lots of other ways you can do it. People are some of the smaller ones do like you say, affiliate for Amazon, or any other type of service that wants your business. There's I've seen people do t-shirt stores, so please buy a shirt with my messaging on it. There's sponsored videos, so at the beginning or end of any video, you deal directly with the advertiser, and that advertiser, you sort of promote that advertiser's products. So I don't think, I mean, you have to be open to things, I suppose, but I don't think it's something that we would do, because you would have to say at the beginning of the call or something,
sponsored by such and such.
Yeah, and they're great because.
Yeah, I find that kind of. They do that. They do that in Spain. They have a popular TV show. The more popular the TV show is, the better. I've even seen it with news shows where the newscaster suddenly goes on about some sunny delight or something, and you just think you've just eroded all credibility there. It's just the most weird thing. And of course, it isn't his fault because it's his job, and he's been told that he has to do that as part of his job role, presumably. And I just think I'm so glad that in the UK we don't do that. You know, it's just at the moment at least it's not done. But having said that, I mean, I don't watch a lot of TV, so I'm not the best person to ask about this. And I don't think you watch a great deal either, do you? Really, you're a Netflix guy.
I suppose it depends. Yeah, I mean, exactly as you say. I mean, Netflix is on. I mean, it's on plenty of devices, but it is on my TV. So I am watching the TV. I'm just not watching the traditional TV channels.
Yeah. So in terms of advertising, I guess the TV channels have lost out a huge amount of revenue because there's just a lot less people. How many people watch Sky these days? Because Sky used to be huge, but I imagine that are they in competition? I don't really know. Are they in competition with Netflix? Are they owned by Netflix? Is Netflix owned by Sky, or do you know anything about that? Because they used to be. Everyone used to have Sky. Well, not everyone. I never had Sky, but almost everyone had Sky before.
I don't think Netflix is owned by. I'll just double check actually, but I don't think Netflix is owned by anyone who's a big player or whatever. I think they're just their own company. But yeah,
it really
I think the
goes to show how
numbers.
fast. Sorry, go ahead.
The numbers on big YouTube stuff is just as big as the biggest TV stuff.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's huge. What I like about it, one of the things I liked about YouTube is the fact that anyone could do it, and that surprising things would become incredibly popular. Like, who knew that millions and millions of children spend every waking moment when they can get on a device watching other children opening toys? I mean, who knew that? But these guys make a fortune. There are loads of channels dedicated just to opening toys. And that's what they do, and they make a lot of money and revenue from it. One of the things that surprised me in terms of the new changes, and one of the things I'm not entirely sure about, is and how this impacts social change, is that my own channel that makes, as I said, between 250 and 300 pounds a month before tax. This channel has far more subscribers. I've got over 20,000 subscribers currently, and far more. I mean, you only have to have 4,000 minutes viewed, I believe, in order to. So you need to have a minimum of 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 viewed minutes. And I have hundreds of thousands of viewed minutes, and I have 20,000 subscribers. So my channel is quite safe, although I always feel that it's very vulnerable anyway, because you're relying on one source of income from a third-party company. So they could change the rules, and in this case, they have changed the rules, and take away your revenue very easily. So I've always felt it's quite vulnerable, but then it's never been a major part of my income, if you know what I mean. So it's kind of a bonus. But my channel is safe at the moment, and I guess a lot of the people who, I mean, most or all of the people who are making any money from YouTube are quite safe as well. But what about the new starters, the upstart, the people who are just starting off? Is it going to dissuade them from putting up content?
Well, actually, I think that if you are just starting out and you've got, you've got no way to become popular or whatever, I think the more people use these various different platforms, the more competitive they're going to be. So, for example, you can only really sponsor so many people on Patreon. If you really like a particular channel, maybe you'll listen to their content and you'll donate to them on Patreon. But you can only do that so many times before there's a certain limit you're willing to pay there.
Right. Yeah.
And there's only so many T-shirts you're going to buy. You're not going to just buy T-shirts from all over the place. So there's a first to market type issue with some of the other ways you'll support people.
So essentially, what you're saying is it probably is going to dissuade people, or people are going to find it a lot harder to get started. Before you could start a bunch of different channels, and one of them would take off, and the rest wouldn't work very well. But now you've got to put a lot more effort with a lot less. Before it didn't cost you anything other than your time, and as long as you can even put videos up on phones. So as long as you got a phone and some time and an internet connection, you could do it. But now it's a bit harder, isn't it? There's a bit more of an entry. What's the word? Entry door? What's the word?
Barrier of entry.
Yeah.
But yeah, coming back to internet change.
Yeah.
The only main thing that I was going to talk to you about in that sort of area of topic is it made me think about how things used to be on the internet, and then how they might be in the future. What is happening right now, or sort of has been happening, is the sort of erosion of not necessarily privacy in general, but the anonymity of the internet is definitely disappearing. I mean, that's just factual. But I think in the future, people will treat it less and less like it's anonymous. So they will be aware that either everything you do is recorded, which I think is the case already, but it would just be much more common knowledge, and you'll start to see, I think, more things happening, like someone showing up on your doorstep as a result of something you search, that sort of thing. There'll be more and more of that stuff happening. I like to think that I don't have anything to worry about there, but
well, this actually, I think that that's an interesting thought, because we've discussed this before in a previous podcast about transparency and about being honest, and I think nobody knows what happens behind closed doors, right? But if you're going to be the best person you can be, you're going to be proud of the things that you do. You're not going to be ashamed of the things that you do. And if you make a decision which is a shameful decision, you know that to be a shameful decision.
That's legal stuff. I mean, when we're talking about it now, we might even be talking about, let's say you search for, I always use the Nike trainers example. Let's say you search for a pair of trainers and you don't buy anything, and someone turns up on your doorstep with a pair of trainers asking, that happen to fit your feet, asking whether or not you'd like to make a purchase today. That sort of
right. Yeah, that's a bit intrusive. On the other hand, maybe as technology improves, they'll realize that you're not going to buy the Nike trainers. Maybe they'll know what your bank balance is, or how much money you've got. Or there'll be an algorithm which will estimate how much money you've got, and they'll look at other searches you've done and other purchases that you've made, and they'll have quite an accurate. It's quite scary to think about, but quite an accurate sort of digital representation of who you are and what your interests are, and what your the percentages that they'll probably estimate the percentage that you would actually purchase this item or not.
Well, I have heard about the big supermarkets, because the big ones are into all sorts of things now, whether it be banking and insurance and that type of stuff. I've heard about them using the information from your supermarket purchases to determine the likeliness of how long you'll hang around with respect to life insurance. So if you're doing loads of alcohol and cigarettes in your purchases, it's going to be different from someone that's buying lots of kale and broccoli.
So yeah, this is interesting. It comes down to another thing as well that was in the news. I haven't seen it recently, but quite some time about mapping your genome. And I've been very tempted to map my genome in the past, and for like £120 or something, they will send you something in the post, and you lick it. I mean, you put a little.
You're about to say something which is almost identical to what I've done, I think.
Oh, really? Have you done this? So you get a bit of your DNA, and then you send it off, and they analyze it, and they tell you there are all sorts of things they can tell you from it, like where your ancestors came from, as we've already discussed on the previous one, that we're all related to each other. So I wouldn't pay too much attention to that. and also, but more importantly, what sort of what diseases you're susceptible to, or you're likely to become susceptible to. As we all know stories of people who are 95 years old, or centenarians, people who have lived to 100, and they're always asked the same question, what's the secret to your long life? And then you always get someone who said, oh, well, I hardly eat anything, and another one's like, oh, well, I lived a pure life, and I lived in a nunnery or whatever. And then you get some other guy who's sitting there smoking 40 fags a day, never done a day's worth of exercise, and worked in a pub his whole life, drinking huge amounts of alcohol, and there he is 100 years old, and you just think, well, how did that happen? And it's down to genetics. So I think it's really interesting to do that and to find out what diseases I'm susceptible to, and perhaps is there a way that I think your body changes and your DNA modifies itself as well. I believe that, but I also think that healthcare in the future is going to. At the moment, it's pretty much a one size fits all. But I'm pretty sure that at some point we're all going to have our DNA mapped and our genome mapped, and we're going to have specific tailored treatments and preemptive treatment as well. Like, you're likely to develop this particular type of cancer. So
yeah, I've actually seen things on this, like that you can get like a type of app or something, and you can see your medical. You're essentially managing your own medical care.
So
I thought that you were going to say when you were thinking of doing it, you decided not to send off your DNA or whatever, because then that company has your DNA. And you don't really know what they're going to do with it.
That's actually true. Yes, I did, because the way things are going. I mean, your wife is a doctor, so you'll know a lot more about this than I do. But the way things are going, I mean, I have noticed that the NHS has been bankrupt for decades. When I was a boy, bearing in mind that I looked at it from a child's perspective, but when I was a boy, I am sure that the NHS was the jewel in the crown of British accomplishments, and we were proud of it. It was the best healthcare in the world. We knew it. We didn't need to even look at anybody else's, like Canadian ones, see that it was better. We just knew it was the best, and that was it. We were proud of it as a nation, and it's over the years it's become eroded worse and worse and worse, to the point, based on money really alone. I mean, it's such an expensive mammoth of a thing to fund, and a lot of care has become more expensive as well. A lot of treatments are a lot more expensive. We're looking at certain drugs that may cost £100,000 a year for. I know that my father-in-law had a new cancer drug, which the aim was to sort of maybe slow down the spread of the cancer and give him an extra couple of months worth of life. And it was like £100,000 a year if you were going to survive a year of taking it. It was very, very expensive. I'm sure that it's become more and more expensive, but I really think that if we look at the US model where it's insurance based, I think we're going to have to go down that road. I dread it. I really don't think that very many people are proud of the US system. If anyone from the US is here and would like to comment, I'd be very happy to hear your comments. But I'm pretty sure that the US system, where the last statistic I saw was like 28% of people can't get any medical care at all. I just think that's a failure, because we should all be entitled to medical care to the best of the ability of physicians and doctors around. And
there are lots of. Yeah, I sort of, I don't want to sort of turn it too much into a politics based show, but I would like to know your opinions on something that I thought about with respect to socialized healthcare, and that's at the point of its creation. If you're going to do it, regardless of whether you agree with it or not, if you're going to give the government responsibility for people's healthcare, what do you think about a policy which says it's always going to be a percentage of the GDP? Because my feeling is that the Conservatives disagree with
Yeah.
And whether you agree with socialized healthcare or not, you can't take responsibility of something and then starve it of resources. So my thinking was, if you make the revenue of that institution, the NHS, a percentage of the income of the tax income, then it kind of preempts that problem. That's what I was thinking about.
I think that everything is interconnected with everything else, and there's no way of avoiding it. I did a lot of learning, listening to lectures, university lectures about economics and everything like this, and I came one day to the conclusion that there is no such thing as politics. It is all just economics. You cannot disassociate one from the other. When there's an economic crisis, it influences political outlook, and so you can pretty accurately predict political swings and uncertainty based on the economics of the time. So, for example, when if there's enough money to run the NHS or some kind of social healthcare system, then everyone's happy, and nobody minds. It's a great thing to have. Everyone loves it. It benefits everybody, as long as it's efficiently run and everyone can get treatment on time and there's enough money to fund all of that. It's a great thing. But when times are tight and there isn't money, which is very much the case at the moment, I simply don't see another way out of it. Then suddenly the NHS is a burden, it costs too much money, it's inefficient, so on and so forth. And there's a lot more political uncertainty, and there's a lot more of people moving to either side of the political spectrum and getting very heated and angry about these particular events. And similar things happen we're using the NHS and healthcare as an example, but it's in absolutely every aspect of human existence. So ultimately, to me, economics is where it begins and where it ends. If the economics work, then people are happy. If the economics do not work, then things start getting pretty radical. I personally think that if we're going to consider ourselves, we're social animals, I guess. Ultimately, we're an animal and we're social. But if we're going to consider ourselves civilized, then to me, in a civilized society, we don't let people who are sort of disabled, or people who are in need, or people with any kind of problems just fall through the cracks. We don't just turn our back on them and walk away. We discussed Jesus and Christianity and the way that neither of us are religious, but there are some good ideas. And one of them is that, if we look at Jesus or Buddha or any of the other kind of people or even non-religious people, of which there are many, many, like Gandhi, or I was going to say Mother Teresa, but she definitely was religious. But all sorts of people who, Martin Luther King, the list goes on and on and on. Nelson Mandela, lots of people who've stood up and made a very big, strong social impact. Anyway, basically, what I'm trying to say is that I think we need to look after people, and so we need to have some kind of social fair. We shouldn't turn our back on people. They've all done that.
So the arguments that I've heard on these issues are the rebuttal to socialised healthcare is just declaring things are right doesn't mean that the services are available. So presumably, or I've heard it said that South Africa states that healthcare is a right for everyone.
Yeah.
But just by saying that doesn't mean that hospitals are going to pop up with great healthcare everywhere. And the reason why that doesn't work is there's no incentive to do it, and that's why you have a market for people who are incentivized to get in it to make the money from it.
Yeah.
The problem, in my view, with the free market healthcare or private healthcare is that, as you say, there's a percentage of people. I mean, I've seen some documentaries and stuff where even with the NHS, they don't bother going because they're in such dire straits that, you know, they're just not looking after themselves. And if you put some form of cost, even if it's a low cost, then they're just not going to go.
Yeah.
And I think that
people who are on the breadline and do not have spare cash are not going to get medical treatment, because even if it's a very low cost, they're not going to get it. I think I've got an example of something which I'd like to put out here. A very good friend of my mother's died of cancer a couple of years ago, and she phoned me up, and just before Christmas, because after my mum passed away, we became friends, and she sort of, she wanted to sort of have more of a, I don't know, she felt that she needed to be part of our family and sort of make an effort to keep in touch and things. And she was a very lovely woman, and she, her name was Claire, and she gave me a call just before Christmas, and she said, "I got some terrible news. I'm sorry. I've got about 2 weeks to live. I've got cancer. Nothing can be done about it, and I'm going to die." And I just, what do you say when you hear something like that? It was utterly shocking. And she said, "Don't worry, I've come to terms with it. It was a bit hard at first, but now I know that that's going to happen and there's nothing can be done about it. I feel at peace." Which I thought, she just goes to show what a tremendous person she was. But then she said something important, and this is something I've never forgotten. It was only 2 years ago, but nevertheless, it's something that I think I would like to share. And that is this. She said, "I have had cancer for the last year or so, and I've been having treatment, and they had chemotherapy, and they thought that it was cured and I was in remission. And I had another a session at the hospital lined up with, in February or March, but I didn't feel right, but I thought, oh, it's in February or March. I'll just get through Christmas, and then and then I'll go, and it'll be fine." And in actual fact, she said she had to take her car to the MOT. She needed to get the MOT done, and so she took the car, and it failed the MOT, and she spent a few £100 on the car to get it passing through the MOT. A car which a few weeks later she had no use of, because she had died. She left a fully year, a car with a year's worth of MOT on it, and she paid double the amount of money on the car as she would have done if she'd have gone in and had she'd paid for someone just to have a look and give her a checkup. And she said to me, "The lesson I have learned, and it's too late for me, but if I can pass this information on to others, the lesson I have learned is that health is the most important thing you've got, and money should not be an object." For when you think about it, I spent twice as much money on the car as it would have cost me to go and have the reassurance that that the cancer hadn't come back and hasn't spread. And to be honest, she said, it may not have made any difference at all, but if they'd have got it quick enough, then I might have been eligible for some further treatment, which may have stopped it or slowed it down to the point where I can have a little bit more life. She said, so my point is this, that we look at things and we look at costs, and we weigh things up, and we say, that's too expensive, I'm not going to do it. And another thing that's not so important, we'll spend twice the money on. And I think this is very important, because people who haven't got a lot of money, and Claire was, by the way, she was a head nurse, and she'd worked in the NHS for her entire adult life. And she married a doctor. She was a doctor's wife. So she knew what she was talking about when it comes to the NHS. And the thing is that the state-run NHS couldn't treat her quickly enough, but she could have had things looked at independently at a cost. And if we are going to go to a cost-based system, the people who can't afford it are not going to do it. And that's the case in the US, and we see that in the US. I just wouldn't want that in my own country.
Well, I think they would probably say that it doesn't necessarily have to be the US in order for it to be a cost-based system. But yeah, I tend to agree. There might be a balance in the sense that there are some instances where I think that doesn't necessarily have to be free. So if you have someone who, say for example, they're playing a basketball game or something and they break their finger, I think you should get it sorted, yes, but that doesn't necessarily have to be something so important that it would have to be covered by a NHS that's, as you say, is almost bankrupt. So it's there for those instances that you're talking about. And we've got things like...
You just say that you broke your finger in another way. If there were certain things that were excluded, you could just say, oh yeah, I fell over and I broke my finger.
Well, the basketball thing was more a instance of, it's voluntary, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that. What I mean is, like, there are opticians that are private, and you don't have to go to the opticians, but it's not necessarily covered on the NHS.
Well,
there are
because I actually do have to go to the opticians because I've, as you know, I've got poor eyesight. I'm short-sighted, and I also have astigmatism. And they say because of the level of my short-sightedness, I've got a higher risk of glaucoma and macular degeneration as well. I mean, not particularly high risk, and there is no instance of it in my family, but nevertheless, because of my eyes, I have got a higher risk, and therefore I should go at least once a year to the optician, which I do not do. And I don't do it because at the moment I've got a pair of glasses that haven't got many scratches on them, and they work perfectly well. And every time I go to the optician, I get people trying to upsell me to all sorts of other things that I don't necessarily need. It can be quite a hard sale sometimes. Oh, you definitely need new glasses, and it's going to cost you several £100, because it does for me, because of the type of lenses that I require. And you can't just have them fitted into the existing glasses you've got because they're a bit worn and blah blah blah. So it kind of puts me off, and it's and I know I should go, but I don't. Same goes for me. The last time I went to the dentist, and my wife said to me, "You should go to the dentist. You haven't been for a long time." I had no problems with my teeth, and whenever I've gone to the dentist, they've always said, "Yeah, you got no problems with your teeth. You're doing a good job. Well done." And
that's another example of something that you would think that would be covered, but is private.
It's private, yeah. But this is the thing. Comes down to the genome, because I evidently got reasonably good teeth, but I've got poor eyes, and these kind of things would come up in the genome if it was mapped. But at the same time, and the reason I kind of got onto this is because ultimately, if we are going to have to require insurance, any insurer worth their salt would not insure you if you had a very high risk of brain aneurysm for having brain aneurysms. So, if you had a very high risk of a certain type of cancer, it wouldn't make sense for them to insure you against that particular type of cancer.
The pre-existing conditions issue, isn't it?
Exactly.
Which they talk about. But what my point is that if we're going to keep healthcare open for everyone, then there are certain things which can be perhaps deemed as non-essential. If we're going to treat people for cancer, for example, for free, which I completely am on board with, there are some things like, I don't know, a broken toe or something like that, which could be done at cost, which isn't going, providing it doesn't lead on to some major condition if untreated.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, it's such a complexity.
It's one of those debates that we could probably talk for hours for and not get anywhere on. But we certainly didn't start out with the intention of going into healthcare.
No, it was about social change. I mean, healthcare is an interesting thing, and it's vital. And I think that we all have a right. I mean, as a human being, right? Surely we have a right to water. We have a right to life. We have a right to say and feel and think what we want without fearing for ourselves. And these rights are not equally available to people around the world. And in fact, women. I saw it today in a news article this morning that women. Where was it? At the I can't remember where it was, at the BBC or somewhere. No, I can't remember where it was. Somewhere very. It wasn't the BBC, but it was somewhere big, large, and well known. It could have been the NHS. In fact, it was. Funny enough, that's what it was. It was the NHS. Women in the NHS have got a 15% pay deficit when it comes to men. And I didn't read the whole article because you come across this so often, this inequality, and then it comes down to this, and a little bit down under the headline, it said that most of the top jobs, which obviously pay the most money, are men, and there's an underproportion of there's not enough women in there, and so the women are on lower wages on average, and so on and so forth.
This is something I think either we should do an actual call on, or it's something we should stay far away from.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking it might be the latter. So the rebuttals I've heard about this one is that it doesn't take into consideration what people's interests are, what their choices are.
Yeah.
But then I'm sure there is some discrimination out there also. But like I say, I'd probably rather not spend too much time speaking about politics because
no.
I think either you go into it 100% or not at all.
But the genome thing is that.
Are you still there? So I think we've lost Jake. I'll wait for a few minutes for you to come back, Jake. Might be a loss of battery or something. And for those of you that are listening, I promise that I didn't cut anyone off because of politics or anything like that. So we were discussing social change in relation to the internet and YouTube. I will wait for Jake to come back on for a few minutes, and if he doesn't come back on, then I'll probably end the call. So if you have any opinions on any of the things we've spoken about today, feel free to put it in the comments. As per my request, if you have anything that you can donate on Patreon, the link is in the description of the video. And thanks a lot for listening.